Hello and welcome to the live show for the Echo Wife from me and Angie's Fiction Addiction Book Club. We're joined by Simon today. He read the book, quite liked it, so wanted to come and chat about it. Quite mixed opinions, don't we, on this one? So it'll be an interesting chat. So what was everybody's overall thoughts?
So let Simon the guest go first.
So when I was reading it, I enjoyed it. I was reading it obviously as a thriller, I suppose, and I thought it was quite good. I read it quickly, but then I know we'll come on to this later. When I got to the afterword and understood a lot of the inspiration for it, if that's the right word, and the thinking behind the themes that were in it, it made me think of it differently, and I appreciated a lot of the thought that had gone into it that wasn't necessarily apparent just from the plot. So I enjoyed it as a story, and then I also appreciate it as something a bit more meaningful as well.
I think that maybe that's what I'm missing when I read it, because I don't think my ebook had the afterword in, like the author's afterward. So I sort of read it. I wasn't sure whether, like, I knew it was sci-fi thriller-ish, and I did enjoy part of it, and the pacing was good, and sort of the writing was good. But when I read sci-fi, I have to believe in the science, and there was parts of the science where I was like, I don't know, that doesn't seem
That's
right,
fair.
or what?
Yeah.
Why would that happen? So I think that's what's influenced sort of my star rating on it, not the book per se, but sort of me personally as a reader. I'm just like, really? Would it happen that quick?
I thought the same. But this doesn't make sense. That's not logical. Like there's a contradiction here, and I just sort of. I think the only way you can read the book is accept the rules as they're presented as you go along, and don't think about it too much. And just accept it as a slightly alternative universe where some of this stuff is likely, because the whole thing is obviously
Totally made up.
absolutely insane.
Science fiction.
In disbelief, and just go with it. But like, I can totally understand why reading it, if you're the sort of person who needs to believe it to an extent, like believe it's credible and this could happen potentially if we made one or two scientific breakthroughs, this could be what happens. And I don't think this story is one that lends itself to that.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a quick read for me. I did it in a couple of days. I started it, and that first chapter, I was like, this is going to be so shite. I was so disappointed. And Simon was like, no, like that is just a weird random chapter. It's not like that for the rest of the book. And then after that, I was like, nah, I really love this. I think that it's really interesting to have read The Anomaly last month to then go into this, because I think that they're both books that have a lot of ideas, and they've got a lot of stuff in there to try and make you think. And my issue with The Anomaly was I didn't feel it was character focused enough, and it was very plot focused, whereas I feel like this one's the direct opposite. This one was very character focused, the plot was very secondary, and I ended up really enjoying that aspect of the book. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, that's probably it as well. And if you read thrillers, there was part of it when you read it as a thriller that you were like, whoa, do you know what I mean? But then at the same time, I was thinking, oh, why didn't this know that before? Like, why haven't would someone really not question why he's just disappeared into the mountains, and when he comes back, he's a bit weird? Like, some of the plot points were a bit maybe over exaggerated or simplified to be able to get the plot going.
I don't read a lot of thrillers either, so like in terms of the thriller tropes or things like maybe no making sense, I just didn't really pick up on any of that because it's no my go-to genre really.
And I don't know what it says about me though, because we're in spoiler territory already.
Go for it.
Because for me, that's the first thing that I would have done. Like, oh, I'll just make a new one and then we'll all get away with it. That would have been my, like...
I didn't think of it until they suggested it, and I was like, "Oh, duh, this is the obvious solution." So,
I am an evil genius.
We knew
well,
this.
you have to.
One of the things I found particularly interesting in the book was the view of women. And I feel like there's a lot of commentary in here running about the value that women can add to the workplace and to a relationship, to a home, and to society. And that's something that I just found to be really interesting. So I've got these two opposites when it comes to Evelyn and Martine, and so we get to see quite a wide range of these views played out. And something that really stuck with me was when Evelyn was talking about her and her husband and how like their relationship was atrocious basically, and he was a bit of a ball, but she couldn't speak out about it because she would have just been labelled like a hysterical woman, and he would have sort of got away scot-free. And like maybe would have hindered people wanting to work with her in the future and stuff. And I just thought that was really interesting because that happens so often in society. We see celebrity couples or just high profile couples, people we probably know in everyday life where that happens.
I think that the role of women in society, and I think the role is if you choose your career as being your main focus and how you're seen as a woman, of making that choice and having goals in your career, and sort of being the expert in your field when people don't expect you, especially when you're in an academic field. So there's no sort of everyone. If you're a doctor, you're a doctor. There's no gender or anything assigned to that. So there was sort of that commentary in there, sort of when she was getting her awards and how people treated her or who they thought she was, and that was really, I enjoyed that part of it. And then the flip side of sort of Martine, who basically created what he wanted, as in a wife. My wife will be this and this and this, and that's how he programmed her. And this will be a role in life for me. So I enjoyed that sort of element of it.
I did as well, and like I think the fact that Martine is programmed to be his perfect wife is really interesting, because then when she has opinions on things, she even starts being like, right, is this my actual opinion, or have I been conditioned to think like this? And I think that that's so prevalent in relationships where there's maybe abuse happening, there's coercive control, emotional manipulation, like, and again, that was just so interesting. And then Evelyn would start to question, Martine would say something and she'd be like, aye, but do you think like that? And I just think that that's really interesting as well, like, because we know obviously she has been programmed to a certain extent. And I think that Evelyn was really interesting because she didn't want kids, and it felt like she almost had to be the best of the best in her career field to justify why she didn't want kids. Like, and I totally see that in society as well. Like, a woman can't just choose to not have kids, but there's got to be a reason. Like, and if she has chosen to not have kids, she can't just be a wee cashier for Asda, because that's not a career. Like, there almost needs to be a justification for why one would feel that way.
It's like you had to sacrifice this so you can have this, rather than I've chose, or I'm in the position to be here, and this is where I'm happy in my life. Society expects you to have sort of made some sort of compromise or gave something up to be able to have something else.
Yep.
So I think that did come through in those two characters and how they interacted with each other. But yeah, their relationship was like, I was a bit like, where's this going as well? That did keep us interested.
It kept returning to this question of what is Martine for? That was revisited that throughout the book, and there was a question about what is the purpose of a woman. Like, Martine obviously doesn't exist for her own, her own pleasure. She's been created for a purpose, but then I think that question is extrapolated into what purpose does a woman serve in society. She can't just be. She has to be something to a man almost and have a definition beyond her own person.
Yeah. What did you think of Martin as a male character? Do you think he was written well, or was the parts of that when you were a bit like, because I don't know whether he's been more. Have I called him the right name? But like the husband. I don't even like. Do you know like whether he came across to me as like quite stereotypical? So I don't know whether I'm missing some of the nuance in that.
I think he was very one-dimensional, but as from Evelyn's perspective, and she's maybe not necessarily going to have a great deal of sympathy for him, but he was very one-dimensional and thuggish, which I didn't really think about when I was reading it, because I think he filled a role. I think he was more of a device than a character, both in terms of the plot and in terms of exploring the two main female characters. So I don't think that we were really ever supposed to explore his character particularly, just the effect his character had on the others that were the main focus.
But I think again that's almost interesting because men, like no offence, but men have like a lesser justification needed to just exist in society. Like whereas women need to be X, Y, Z, they need to have accomplished this, they need to have accomplished that, whereas men just get to exist.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's actually really interesting because
men are society.
Like his character isn't hugely developed, but that's fine, and there doesn't need to be a justification for that because he's a man.
And I don't know whether we're jumping forward a bit, but it's just because we're in spoilers anyway. So when they did create the new version of him, and then it was sort of like, but he's now different. And when I was reading it, it didn't really occur to us. But when I was thinking back on it, I was thinking, is that sort of that redemption sort of narrative? Sort of, you can become a different person. Like, do you know what I mean? So yeah, he hasn't done the thing that we found out that happened because they didn't put that memory in his head because they didn't know that's what he did. So does that make him now different? Sort of, can you be rehabilitated and things like that? So I did start to think along those lines, but that was like right at the very end. I don't think it was explored in any depth.
Before he had committed that act, he didn't have that memory either. He committed that act before he could remember doing it, obviously, because he hadn't done it yet. So I still think all the components of his character and all the stimulus that led him to do this thing multiple times wouldn't fundamentally change. What's interesting is he obviously viewed the A to N and then the Martine models as subhuman. And that probably goes back to the view of women where they're commoditized, and although they are literally commodities in this story and designed to be commodities in this story, the whole thing is, as we know, an allegory for the role of women in society generally. And so he got what he needed and then got rid of them when they didn't fit the bill anymore. And I think that is something inherent. I think what would have been much more interesting, and which we didn't really explore in the book, is whether a totally blank slate version of him would still have developed that view, or how much of that is informed by society, by men and women, and how they interact and the way that the whole society operates. Would this have inevitably been the view that he formed because it's so pervasive, or would they have been able to condition somebody to think differently?
Yeah, it does bring up, I think, a lot of books like this to bring up sort of the nature of someone compared to the nurture of someone or their societal sort of experiences. So that was interesting. But I think he did just become, again, quite stereotypical at the end. But we'll probably talk about the end when we get to the end. I'm jumping too far ahead.
All right. We sort of touched there on the treatment of women. We were talking about the fact that they were total commodities and disposable in here, and I just thought that was really interesting because, like, it can seem that way so much in society these days. I think that, you know, there's still so much sexual assault and rape and murder that happens, and it's predominantly women, some men, but predominantly women. And I just think that that was really interesting, the way that it was tackled in this book, because although you're supposed to believe that they're a commodity and you're supposed to believe they're disposable at any time, like they're referred to so often as medical waste, like you get to know Martine, and Martine questions it, and like Evelyn at times is like questioning it almost like she's not a person, like, but, and like I just felt that that was really, really interesting, because I think that violence against women is something that we're so desensitized to an extent in real life, that it was interesting to see that play out on page, even though we know that these are clones and that they aren't real people. Like, how do you feel about them? And how do you feel about the way that they're being treated on page? Like, this guy murdered loads of women, and like, should we just be all right with that because they were clones, and or they were like other, like, how should we feel about that? And I just think that that was so interestingly done.
I think that's when sort of the ethics of scientific research, sort of the idea of what are the ethics of it? How far can you go with something before you're crossing boundaries? And that's why there should be committees and things in place. But then this throws light on the fact that this lab was running under the pretext of one thing, but actually what they were doing is something quite different. And that obviously happens because that's how they then have scientific breakthroughs, don't they? Because they just push the boundaries of the ethics committee to the limit. And I know that from my psychology background, when we used to see the emergence of reality TV, so the emergence of Big Brother, we're going to get 12 however many people, we're going to lock them up and we're going to start doing things to them. You would never get an ethics committee to allow a psychiatrist or a psychologist to do that. But in the name of entertainment, and if they're doing it voluntarily, we'll put it on telly and we'll watch the consequences of what happened. So psychologists were like, we would never be able to do that, but all watch it because it's the only way that they can see things. But then they're quite all right for you to go in and start manipulating sort of, do you know what I mean, other creatures to see how they would react to things. So it did, I was thinking of that along the lines, but I think maybe some of it just wasn't in-depth enough, maybe, because that's maybe not where she was going. So I'd be interested to read what Afterword said.
I think this isn't really what the book was trying to get at, I don't think, but it's still interesting what you say, that these clones, which I think are, I was going to say people, but these clones were created for a purpose, and the idea is they're decommissioned after a day or a couple of days. And, you know, you can support or not support that as a concept, but we then felt quite differently about the women that the husband had disposed of. And at what point do we stop thinking about them as a clone for a purpose and becoming a person, which is sort of the journey that Evelyn goes on with Martine, I suppose. Is it because you've interacted with them for a certain amount of time? What is it that kind of changes that? Do we think differently about the original clones that were just used for that sort of bodyguard protection situation and then flung in the medical waste? Is it the fact that she got pregnant? You know, where's the tipping point between what makes them people? Which I guess is touched on, but not really the main thrust of the themes.
I think maybe that's why, if the book was trying to balance out being an entertaining thriller so that you would read it with what you wanted to see in the themes and ideas. And it must be hard to try and get all of that down into a set amount of pages or word counts, or because I know books are usually a lot longer, and then it's sort of maybe the editorial process is like, well, these are going to be the bigger plot points, but you can still see that it's like underlying and in there. because I was just going to say, I don't know whether it's the difference where Evelyn's treating them like scientific waste, as you said, but he treat them like humans because he
I am
them.
a wife.
Yeah, and do you know what I mean? So that maybe the emotions get involved when you dig something back up, when there still remains there. It hasn't just been insinuated and logged in a book. It's physically found them. I wonder whether that was part of it as well.
That's a good point. Mm-hmm. So moving on to Evelyn and Martine's relationship then, we've sort of spoke about it a wee bit. How did you guys find that?
I found it interesting, but at the same time, like the way that I read it is, it was interesting that she would help her and she understood Martine and was trying to understand her. But I think she was doing it more not woman to woman in a relationship. There was that power imbalance still, I think. And for me, I don't think that power imbalance actually went away. I think Evelyn just used it to her own advantage all the way through. Even at the end, that was more to do with Evelyn than it was with Martine. So our conscience is clear. She can keep going on with her scientific research because she's got it all hidden over here. That's how I felt about them.
Alice says, stop by to say hi, but haven't read it yet. Hello, Alice.
I don't listen to anything that Agnes says.
I've just spoiled it about 3 times.
What happened to Suki Stackhouse?
I really liked their relationship. I totally agree with you. Like, I don't think that Evelyn did anything out of kindness or niceness. I think she did it out of a sense of duty and a sense of covering her own arse a bit. But I still liked it, and I thought that was interesting because on the outside, right, Evelyn's this like mad scientist genius, top of her field, at her A game, and Martine's this like wee domesticated pregnant housewife. So you would think that Evelyn is obviously going to challenge Martine a lot more, but actually in this book it's the other way about. I feel like Martine challenges Evelyn a lot in terms of her feelings and her views on things, and that, again, like that just reinforces that you have this stereotype of somebody's like a housewife or a stay-at-home mum or whatever, then they are less than and they contribute less than like Evelyn would in society, but actually Martine is being just as insightful, just as thought-provoking and just as challenging to Evelyn, as opposed to it being the other way around, which again I really enjoyed because it was sort of a fuck you to how you view housewives and women who choose to stay at home. I really liked that.
Yeah, but I think it was the way that she always knew that she had that one upper hand, because Martine really didn't. Do you know what I mean? There had to be that balance, and I think when you got to the end and realised that Evelyn could just tell Martine what she could do when she was going to do it, and would actually know how to get rid of Martine as well. Like when she's done with Martine, she'll do exactly, in my head, she'll do exactly the same thing. And so I don't know whether she's more interested in the research possibilities than connecting with her as a person. And I think that is sort of looked at the way that Evelyn treats her. But I think in the end, that scientific head just tips it over. Like, she can't have a relationship. But I don't know whether that is with anybody, because she seems to struggle with having relationships with people in general, not just Martine. So it could be part of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of genius head.
You any comments on their relationship?
No, well, not really, because I think what I would probably say is more to do with Evelyns morality, which we're going to come on to. So,
shall we move on to that then?
So there was a couple of bits. Like, I found it really interesting that Evelyn was at pains to keep saying that anything that she was doing that appeared to be good, she wasn't doing for nice reasons. You know, she was saying that I want Martine to take whatever she needs, do whatever she wants, but only so that I don't have the burden of trying to think about what that is and looking after her. I found it really interesting that she was at pains to keep saying, I'm not a good person, I'm not trying to do the right thing here, I'm ultimately being self-serving, even when it looks like I'm being magnanimous. I found it really interesting that that was something she kept repeating.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if she felt like because of what she did for a living, and because how she treated these clones / people / medical waste, that she felt like inherently she could not be a good person if she equated like decommissioning them to like murder, so therefore felt like there was nothing about her that could be good.
I think as well the allegory of the book is that the clones represent women in society. And so that led me to think about Evelyn, because Evelyn is not a clone. And so if the clones represent women, then the people who make the clones represent the patriarchy and society.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered whether Evelyn is almost representative of male allies who, or male feminists who believe in the cause, etc., but still have the privilege of the patriarchy, and whether that sort of that tension or that having a foot in both camps is what Evelyn represents in the story.
Yeah, and that society's more complex now. Maybe I think as laws change and as expectations for people change and the opportunities are there, and not everything may be as equal as it needs to be, and lots of like all the other factors that can still disadvantage people. But there is women who are now in those positions because of the changes, that's the right to an education, the right to be able to vote, there's not the right to go to university and progress this. It's making society more complex because some of the things have been achieved, but at what cost, and where does everybody fit now? And that's why I enjoy books that look at class structure now more than it's a women's issue or it's a men's issue, because to me now I think some of it is more class structure than being a man or a woman. There's all those different factors now, where before there was more strict, there was more like divided lines, where now it's
everyone doesn't just sit in one camp. There's lots of aspects to you that you might have a privilege in this area that actually you've got a disadvantage in another area, and there's almost a hierarchy or competition between underprivileged groups. Which I suppose we could have seen play out with the gender recognition controversy, and women and trans people both feeling that their protections are not being understood well enough by the others. Do you think Evelyn, when she talks about her own morality and her own sense of self, do you think she's right, or do you think she's better than she gives herself credit for, or do you think she's actually a worse person than she recognises or articulates?
I literally didn't think about it. I just accepted what she was saying.
Because she tells us a lot, like about
as
her
fact.
view of herself. So I mean, that's it. I mean, accepting it as fact is a valid answer. Like,
I think it's maybe because she does think more scientifically, and she's quite critical of herself as a person. I think even from a young age, where she was allowed a certain amount of time with her father, wasn't she? She was allowed a certain amount of time and could ask him questions, but only questions that she sort of knew that he would respond to. And then sort of the difference, I wonder whether that's had an impact on her being quite self-critical and not wanting to get too close to some of the things, actually, because she doesn't seem to get close to her research assistants, and the one time she does, she's betrayed. Do you know what I mean? And I wonder whether it's more about the relationship she has. So she thinks of herself, but then she was married, but I wouldn't say that was an ideal sort of marriage. So that was because what was expected of her to be. So she tries to conform, but it's just, for me, she's quite insular person, and she's quite focused on, this is my goal and this is what I want to do and this is why I want to do it.
And then going
which possibly links back to the father also being a scientist, but she seems to come from a privileged background.
Yeah, but then what you'd said before about removing the husband's memory of having killed Martine and her predecessors. At the same time, Evelyn very strongly hinted that her mum killed her dad, and that Evelyn has become aware of this and has continued to cover it up, and she stays in the house, keeps the house to cover it up, etc. And so something in her psyche has covered up this murder, and then her clone, in self-defense, but her clone then also kills somebody. So there's that sort of streak running through the genetics of Evelyn's mum, and then her clone acting violently against a man who's been abusive towards them. And interesting that, I guess, the exploration of the retaliation or the defense is quite consistent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I still think she's just going to get rid of Martine at some point. She's going to turn her off.
Seems something you wanted to talk about was the scientific specifics.
I think we may have covered it at the beginning when I sort of explained that there's if something's got like a science fiction element to it, for me personally, I need to have some sort of hook into reality, and even if it's just 1 or 2 steps away, I need to have something that's like, yes, that really could happen. If you get too far away from that, I get lost. Just like, I can't. That wouldn't be real to me. I know it's fiction, sort of thing, but it's sort of like some of the things that were scientific specific, but then were contradictory in a way. Sort of like how long it took them. They were quite like, oh, it takes this long, and do you know what I mean? And this happens, and then you can do this. And I was just thinking, really? And then I got in my head that I don't know how he was doing it when she's got this like super duper lab that's all locked up, and like all this stuff has to be done like so precisely. Like I just had this vision that he was doing it in a shed somewhere, which I know is probably like not right, because I think he did have his own lab. But I'm thinking, like, how did he do it? If she has to have all this money and all this, I don't know, some of it was siphoned off her. Like, but still, to me, I was just like.
But then he didn't do it, did he? Like, that's, I guess, that
could be the
15 failed attempts before he.
And I think as well, just when they started talking about the memories, and we hadn't given this, but would give him that, and whatever that. I was thinking, but when he built Martine, he doesn't know everything about Evelyn. So then I was like, so are there an exact copy? Like, because he would know everything about Evelyn that makes her Evelyn. So if he's not that good of a scientist, how has he got it completely the same? Is it just physically the same, and some of the personality traits are the same, but he'll not have them 100% the same? So that's when I was starting to like lose some of the threads a little bit, as in it was a bit too inconsistent. But that's just me. Maybe a scientist to be able to tell you is like, you can clone a whole human in your garden shed. I don't know.
If you could have a clone of yourself, would you?
Yes.
I don't think Dale would want a clone of me in the house.
I would send them to work.
Aye.
Yeah.
I'd show it in my books.
100%.
Oh, you could do that. But then you'd have to deal with yourself. And I don't.
Oh, that's true.
I couldn't.
Myself.
I couldn't deal with me. I say this at work.
My clone, and I'll deal with your clone.
Can I not deal with my clone?
I suppose you could
Just
just
sit and have a
one of them could start up your YouTube channel again, Simon. To start them full time on YouTube.
Can you deal with my clone also?
No.
I'll need a third clone then to deal with the other.
Lots of clones.
It get very confusing, I think.
You could send them to parties and things that you didn't want to.
Imagine how many books
so
3 of
true.
you would amass.
I didn't buy that one, it was the other Amy.
You know, one of the first things we spoke about when we met was Amy talking about how much sober Amy loved the presents that drunk Amy bought her.
I can understand that.
Never know what was coming from Amazon.
It's great. So then, one of the big things that changed the way that you viewed the book, it didn't really change anything particularly for me, was the afterword. So do you want to chat a wee bit about that?
Yeah, so I touched on it at the start, but when I'd read the book, I read it as a thriller. I thought it was good, read it quickly, good pace, as Agnes says, and then there were some of those kind of scientific bits that you mentioned that made me also sort of, doesn't really make sense, but I'll just go with the flow. But then when I read it was the acknowledgements.
Apologies, the dog's coming in with a squeaky ball.
That's okay.
So the acknowledgements, it's interesting because she says, and I know you said you hadn't seen it, so she says this is acknowledgements in the true sense of the word. It's not thanks, but acknowledgement, and she acknowledges various. Sorry, I've just realised misgendering the writers. They've been abused sort of through many and various situations throughout their life, and the abuse that they've experienced and the messaging they got from that is what led them and inspired them, if that's the right word, to write this book. And reading the acknowledgements and reading what they experienced and what that made them feel from relationships and different things, I then appreciated the themes of the book about how, for example, the clones are a real allegory for women in society, which might have been quite obvious to people who were reading it. But you do obviously get authors who have a great idea for a plot and write a plot-based story, or a great idea for a character and write a character-based story. And I actually think this is has a theme-based story and a really graphic understanding of the themes. When I reflected back on what happened and what the characters were like, it gave me a completely different appreciation for Evelyn and her role, like I said, is possibly like a beneficiary of the system who doesn't necessarily agree with all parts of it, but still gets those benefits anyway. So I think the acknowledgements really helped me understand what the author was trying to achieve. What do you think?
Hi, Bill. Interested in me now. I think it goes back to what was said when I was, pardon me, when I was reading it. I was thinking that it was sometimes you can tell when an author has a theme that they want to express in their work, and then the story is secondary, and some it's done the other way. So I did get the impression that they had a theme that they wanted to express, and this was their way of expressing it. But again, I think some of it was just a bit disjointed in a way. So maybe if I knew that going in, I could have put those pieces together more to, for my benefit. That's why when I'd read it, and everybody was loving it, and I'm like, I'm missing something. Like, what am I missing? Like, what's I missing? And that's why I was interested to find out what other people's views were, because sometimes when I read something, I get more insight from what other people see in the book that I then haven't. Sort of that collective discussion about it makes me appreciate a book more. Or if I've really loved something and someone will come along and say, well, did you not quite catch that? And I'll be like, oh no, I didn't. And that's part of it. So there's that personal. I enjoyed it. I really want to read more of what they've wrote, because I think they've got a few books out, haven't they? Because I enjoyed the writing style. Maybe just me in science fiction. I need to maybe be more open-minded about my science fiction and not try and put it into my reality. Is what I've learned to do. Every day is a school day.
Anything else to add?
You said the announcements didn't really
I
change
didn't
anything
change
for you?
anything for me.
But Amy loved it anyway. She got it.
I blocked it out before you'd read it.
That's
so.
true. So maybe they did in hindsight.
Amy's the lovable genius, and I'm just the evil genius, because I would have went straight to just clone a new one of them straight away. I wouldn't have gone through all of the hassle. I'd have just said, "Come down to my lab, we'll make a new one."
And lastly, we haven't really given any love to the assistant, and I don't have anything to say apart from, of all the relationships I was rooting for, the friendship between Evelyn and her lab assistant was the one that I really wanted to come through the other side, and I'm glad that it kind of did survive to an extent until it completely fell apart.
Yeah, being another evil genius.
Never trust a lab assistant. That's what I've learned.
These scientists, they lock themselves away and you don't know what they're up to.
The whole like her dad looking himself away for ages and ages, it proper gave me Goosebumps vibes. The don't go down in the basement one. When I was reading that, I was like, oh. Don't know if anybody else picked up on that. Right, what are we reading next month? / this
Now,
month?
we'll read. I always get it round the wrong way, so I better check. Is it the Queen?
The Bandit.
The Bandit. I always get it round the wrong way.
I haven't started it yet though, but I will.
I've started it, but I'm listening to it. I'm in about one chapter in. I got distracted by the Last Kingdom film coming out, so I had to do some rewatching and watch that last night. But I will be reading it over the weekend.
I'm planning to as well,
because it's part of the Women's Prize long list as well. So, people do seem to be saying positive things about it, and that possibly people are saying it's going to be shortlisted. So I'm really looking forward to getting more into it. From what I've listened to, it's got like a funny edge to it, like a black humor edge, which I think I'm going to enjoy.
Good. No, I'm excited to start it. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I really enjoyed that chat.
Me too.
Hopefully everybody enjoys what they are reading, and we'll see you after. Bye.